traveller without observation is like a bird without wings. So wrote Sayyadi Shirazi, the 13th century Persian poet who perfectly portrayed the privileges we all have. The privilege to travel, the privilege to observe, the privilege to learn. I have travelled through and photographed more than 100 countries, and I have observed that the perception most people have of the world is far different to the reality. The vast majority of places pose you no threat. The vast majority of people mean you no harm. The world is more welcoming than it appears from afar. So why is this perception different from reality? I learned this lesson many, many years ago during my first full-time job. I worked with a wise man named Trevor. He was decades older than me. And one day we were sitting at a table during a meal break. And he quietly said, "Do you know the problem with this world?" He took a sip of steaming coffee from the white mug he held in his hand. And before I had a chance to answer, he continued, "The problem is, there is too much us and them." When you see the world as us and them, it changes your perception of other people for the worse. When you view the world this way, it builds a wall of prejudice. This wall is made of many bricks: the bricks of danger, the bricks of culture, the bricks of race, and the bricks of politics. These bricks build a wall so high and so wide that you cannot see over it and you cannot go around it. This wall stops us from seeing what the world is really like on the other side. Let's explore how each of these bricks are formed. The most obvious brick in the wall of prejudice are the bricks of danger. Turn on the TV news and look at stories from places away from Europe, and it will be filled with stories about danger, death, destruction, and despair. However, the reality is much different from that perception. One of my favorite travel destinations is Afghanistan, a country with a very bad safety reputation. Look at news stories about Afghanistan and all you'll see are tales about violence and anger. When I was in Afghanistan, the only tales I came away with were tales of warm welcomes and many smiles. Have a look at this photo. When was the last time you saw a photo of a smiling Afghan? And here are some more. Whilst I was in the country, my guide and we hiked to the village of Kizkut in the Wakhan corridor in the northeast of the country. We were dwarfed by rows upon rows of magnificent mountains that plunge sharp and steep into rivers and ravines. This is the village of Kizkut. It has only 149 inhabitants and has no electricity. Children and women peered shyly from behind mud brick walls as the village elder led us into the village's dimly lit common room that had no furniture except for enormous red rugs with intricate patterns. But the room was soon filled with men who sat on the floor and who sometimes stroked their beard or chin, and they watched me silently. I was given a serving of milky tea and flat bread. And when it was time to leave, the village elder said, "I am sorry that I could only offer you tea and bread." The village elder gave me the last bread in the village, and he apologized for not giving me more. That is the real Afghanistan. The media love talking about stories of conflict and chaos. A few years ago, I visited Bangkok in Thailand, and just before I arrived, the news stories were filled of stories about protest and demonstrations. Was Bangkok safe, I wonder? However, after I arrived, I soon found that all the restaurants were still open, all the shopping malls were still open, and all the tourist attractions were still open. These protests only occupied a handful of streets in a city of 8 million people. Unless you were told that a protest was occurring, you would never know. The media exaggerated problems, but the reality was safety. The bricks of culture can be difficult to remove from the wall of prejudice. One of the most misunderstood regions in the world is the Middle East, and I have traveled to almost every country in the region, including Syria, Iran, and Yemen. I remember being in one Middle East country, and I spoke with many women who had university educations and professional careers. Once I met a sister, brother, and mother from the same family, and we sat down together and we chatted for a while. And the sister told me that she was studying engineering at university. And I commented that I'd met many women who had education and successful careers. And she replied, "We women have a lot of freedom." That is different from what the Western media tells you about women in the Middle East. One aspect about the Middle East are the clothes that they wear. Some will look at them and say, "Look at what they are forced to wear." But consider this for a moment. In parts of the Middle East, women and men wear similar clothes. Women will cover their hair and wear full-length clothes that only shows their hand and face. And men will cover their hair and will wear full-length clothes that only shows their hand and face. A few years ago, I met with people from the Sharjah Centre for Cultural Communication. Sharjah is the city next to Dubai. They explained to me that these long clothes were introduced many, many, many hundreds of years ago to protect people against the heat, sun, and sand of a desert landscape. So are women and men being forced to wear these clothes? Or do they wear them because they are proud of their culture? The bricks of race are the most stubborn to remove from the wall of prejudice. I've been living in Kenya, Africa, for a few years, and I experienced a side of the country that the vast majority of tourists never see. Watch the news, and it will only have stories about Kenya that involve poverty, conflict, and crime. Well, let me show you a side of Kenya you will not see on the news. This is my local shopping mall. It's in the capital city, Nairobi, and it's modern, comfortable, and clean. You also won't see the high-rise buildings that dominate the center of Nairobi. You won't see the large homes that business people can live in. And you won't see stories about the world's leading mobile phone payment system called M-Pesa that was developed and implemented in Kenya more than a decade ago. Why don't you see this side of Kenya in the news? The Western media treat countries with mostly white people differently from countries with mostly brown and black people. For example, if I mention the word Ethiopia, most of us would think about the drought that caused the famine and those famous Live Aid concerts. But wait a moment. The drought, that famine, and those concerts were in 1985, more than 30 years ago. Where are the stories about Ethiopia's growing economy? Where are the stories about the long, rich history of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church? Where are the stories about Ethiopian Airlines? It has one of the world's youngest and newest fleet of aircraft. Much newer and much younger than most of the airlines here in Europe. By way of comparison, let's look at the country of my birth, Australia. We too have droughts, and we also have terrible bushfires and damaging winds from cyclones every year. But when we talk about Australia, people don't want to talk about those things. They want to talk about kangaroos, koalas, and long white beaches. So why is it that we don't talk about current natural disasters in Australia, but we talk about a natural disaster more than 30 years ago in Ethiopia? The media love portraying African nations in a bad and negative way. Africans are not all poor. They are not all farmers, and they don't all live in huts. Africa is a dynamic continent, and its people do live and work in high-rise buildings. They can drive modern cars, and they absolutely love using their smartphones. But you won't see any of that on the news because of the color of their skin. The bricks of politics can be very challenging to remove from the wall of prejudice. Watch the TV news, listen to the radio, and read a newspaper or online news. Is there another country that is almost always shown in a negative way? If this is happening, perhaps, the bricks of politics are influencing what you see, hear, and read. If there is another country that has bad relations with your own, bad relations, and there are people marching in the streets, protesting in the streets, the government and media will look at the masses of people marching and say that it's people power and marching for democracy. But if similar protests occur in a country you have good relations with, the government and media will look at masses of people marching and call them troublemakers, rioters, and they may not appear in the news at all. I have travelled to many countries with a very poor political perception due to their government and leaders. Spend time talking to people in these countries, and you will realise that the people going about their daily lives with little or no involvement in politics cannot be compared to their government or leaders. I once visited a country in the Middle East that has a very poor political perception. And on more than one occasion, young men approached me to say, please tell the world we are not terrorists. And in another country with an equally poor political perception in the Middle East, an unassuming man approached me in a market, and with a concerned look on his face, he asked, why does the world hate us so much? Every time you treat people of the nation this way, it hurts. Why are you so unkind, the people say. But every brick in the wall of prejudice hurts. It all hurts. The bricks of danger in the wall of prejudice hurt because people say, why do you think my country is dangerous when it is safe and we are kind? The bricks of culture in the wall of prejudice hurt because people say, why do you say so many wrong things about my culture? Why don't you understand? And the bricks of race in the wall of prejudice hurt because people say, why do you only talk about poverty and problems in my country instead of prosperity and progress? But just because you travel doesn't mean you will remove bricks from the wall of prejudice. If you travel and if you think you are better than other people you meet, and if you think your country is better than theirs and your culture is better than theirs, then the bricks in the wall of prejudice will remain. I have advice for how to avoid this. Believe that you can learn something about the world and its people from every single person you meet, regardless of their job, their education, their money, their status, or their age. If when you travel, you look at other people with suspicion, they will treat you the same way. If you believe that other people mean you harm, they will treat you with caution. And if you think you are better than other people, they will walk away. But if you consider yourself equal to other people, if you believe you can learn something about the world from every person you meet, and if you take a genuine interest in them, they will open themselves up to you and let you into their lives. And when this happens, the bricks of danger, culture, race, and politics will fall away, and the wall of prejudice will crumble into dust at our feet. And you will realize that there is no us and them in this world. There is only us. And you will understand the humanity we all share. People around the world have and share similar ideas in life. We all share a hope to be healthy and happy. We all share a fondness of food. We all share a dream of a better future for our families. We all share a common humanity. Every single person here shares that humanity with dozens, hundreds, thousands, millions, billions of people around the world. Let me explain by telling you a final story. Somaliland is a self-declared independent country on the eastern side of Africa that sees very, very few tourists. In the capital city of Hargeisa live gypsy children who wander along dirt streets, in between short buildings, underneath the blazing sun, where the dust dries your mouth and the air is filled with the sound of echoing mosque prayers. Among these gypsy children who speak no English was this girl who always gave me a small smile and a welcoming wave. I saw her every day I was in Hargeisa, including one day when I sat on a broken red plastic chair speaking to a street vendor named Farhan. When you are the only tourist, you become the tourist attraction. And soon a large crowd gathered. A crowd too large, for it stopped people from seeing Farhan's goods. Farhan told everyone to leave. And this girl's face changed from gladness to sadness. A face of sadness needs no translation. I said to Farhan, she stays, she stays. And there was soon silence, with only Farhan, the girl, and me remaining. Farhan asked me, why did you want her to stay? And I replied, tell her that she is my friend. And her response, which Farhan translated, was, I love you. A valuable lesson was observed, that the similarities that unite us as people are far more significant than the differences that divide us. It didn't matter that the girl and I wore different clothes, spoke different languages, or had different skin colors. It didn't matter whether we pray in a church, temple, or mosque. And it didn't matter if we eat our food with a fork, chopsticks, or our hands. For we all share a humanity that is like a shining silver thread which weaves through each and every person and binds us all together. As you journey, gaze deeply in people's eyes. Gaze very deeply. And observe and feel the humanity we all share. When this happens, as you roam roads, wander woods, and view villages, you will see people through new eyes, and you will embrace the whole world in your arms. Thank you.